Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. This is a great day for us. My name is Grant Woods. I'm with Ava Information, and what we're doing today is we're actually sitting down with the IT staff from Federal Way Public Schools up in Washington State, and we're discussing their experiences that they've gone through this past year of this pandemic, and some of the challenges that they've faced, and some of the solutions that they found to work through it, and some of their vision for the future and how this is going to continue to roll out. And so I very much appreciate everyone coming on today and sharing their experiences with us. And what I'd like to do first is start introducing the room. And I'm going to pass this on to my colleague, Chuck, first to introduce himself. And then afterwards, if everyone else can sort of take line and do the same, that would be great. So Chuck, take it over.
Thanks, Grant. My name is Chuck Tuck, and I am with Ava. So I'm a product trainer and evangelist for the company, and I've primarily worked the K through 12. So that's my role. So I'll go ahead and let's start up in the upper left-hand corner area with Kara. Is it Kara or Kara?
Kara. Yep, you got it right the first time. My name is Kara Nillen, and I am Assistive Technology Facilitator for the Federal Way School District.
Very well. Tammy?
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in here. We're actually the Teaching for Learning department, and we're the Instructional Technology department there. We do collaborate greatly with our information technology services, but it's awesome that we could all be here, so thank you for having us. My name is Jane Miller, Director of Instructional Technology, STEM and Project-Based Learning in Teaching for Learning. So Tammy, actually, Dennis, why don't you go first?
Hey everybody, Dennis Purcell. I also work in the Teaching for Learning department, and I'm the director of remote and blended learning in Teaching for Learning.
Cool. All right.
I'm Tammy Smith, and I am in the Teaching for Learning department. I'm a content facilitator for our secondary schools for language arts and math and social studies.
And I'm Lori Harrison. I do the same job as Tammy, a content area facilitator for ELA and social studies, but for elementary students.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone, again, for joining us. I think we'll start off with the down and dirty here, and let's see where we've gone and where we've been and where we're going. So maybe I'll ask this first one to Jane, and take us through since the beginning of this process. You know, when the pandemic really took hold and all of us were shut down immediately, and what happened at that point? Where did you go from all of a sudden being in full classroom to then having to have remote learners teaching remotely, everyone from there? And then take us through that process of where you've gone since it started up until the changes that you've made since, and now up until today, where you are now and where you're going to be going in the future with this.
Yeah, it's been quite a road, and it's actually been really a collaborative one with our Teaching for Learning department and actually the entire district as a whole. But back, in March 2020, we were told we were to go remote, emergency remote. And so it was our partnership in Teaching for Learning with Tammy and Lori and Dennis in the group and all of the crew to really make that happen. And I'm actually going to go ahead and because I do really feel that Tammy and Lori were so integral to this that I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to them. So go ahead and, Lori, can you kick us off in that first piece of that emergency, and then we'll head on over to Tammy.
Sure. And you said this happened in March, and I'll never forget because it was Friday the 13th. It was the last day we had our little humans in front of us. So from then on, it's just really been a lesson and experience in adaptability and pivoting to new information, just like everyone everywhere. So initially, we thought we'd be gone for a couple weeks, and we made independent work packets for our scholars working from home with check-in support with teachers, and then teachers just really heroically quickly got up to speed on skills that they did not even know were out there. So developing their ability to conduct instruction through Zoom, remote class meetings and daily instruction with scholars, and then scholars also the expectation that they work asynchronously in the lessons that teachers provide. So we finished out the last school year that way. And then recognizing that we were going to need to accelerate some options for students learning when they're out of school, we developed a video learning series with daily instructional television experiences in our local cable access channel for our scholars, with teachers delivering that instruction, and summer work experiences for students as well. Still thinking we'd be returning with students in front of us. We did not, as most people did not. So we just got better and better at using the technology and the skills to deliver this sort of blended learning for our students. So just super proud of the learning that's happened in spite of this for students, and the learning that's happened because of this for teachers, about being effective delivers of instruction for students 100% remotely. And now, since just the beginning of March, we're slowly transitioning to bringing our students back for hybrid instruction in front of us part of the time, and remotely part of the time as well. And in the next several weeks, we'll have the whole crew back in some capacity.
Just to add on to that, some of the things like Lori referenced, the initial at-home work packets that we created, all the content facilitators really dove in and had those ready to go right away. So our scholars had some type of learning available at home from the day that the first week that school was out. And then once we realized we weren't coming back, we quickly pivoted to creating supports for teachers that just, they didn't have to use the full regular curriculum. We focused instead on essential standards. So every week we provided the most essential standards that scholars should be working on. So teachers got a week at a glance every week that had the essential standards. It had some suggestions for remote activities that they could do. And again, just with, I say, kudos to our teachers, because they were in such a learner stance and so quickly had to start making use of technology that they had never, many of them had never used before, and teaching in a way they had never taught before. And so even though it was emergency shutdown, I feel like we still saw some really good teaching and learning happening in the spring. And then we realized, when we realized we weren't coming back in the fall, we revamped our all of our courses that have a guaranteed and viable curriculum. We created we revamped the scope and sequence to reflect being in a at-home remote learning. And we again boiled down the standards. I think like for language arts, for instance, there's about 40 standards, Common Core standards. We boiled it down to about 15 per course, most essential standards for teachers to focus on. And we created a week at a glance for the whole year with asynchronous and synchronous activity suggestions for teachers. And so they were, instead of taking our previous curriculum and the daily lessons, they were looking more holistically at, over this week of learning, what are the most essential things that my students need to focus on. And so they've just been champions at doing that. They really quickly pivoted and were able, and Lori and I visit classrooms all the time, and I just am so impressed with the work that our teachers and scholars have been doing in this remote environment.
Yeah. Hey, Dennis, you want to go ahead and chat about our midsummer experience into this year on that refinement?
Yeah. Well, and actually leading up into that, as Lori and Tammy mentioned, Grant, we had teachers using our learning management system, Canvas, but it was mostly secondary teachers. And we had a few elementary teachers who created some public websites to share information with their families. So the materials that Lori and Tammy and the rest of the content facilitators provided to teachers allowed them to keep doing what they do really well. They're just amazing, which was amazing instruction, even in a remote setting. And then we had a committee that included families. And families gave us feedback on what we could do to make it even better, because they said teachers, it was obvious to them teachers were putting out maximum effort. But they gave us great feedback on how we can make things a little more consistent, how we could build on some of the things that Jane's team was doing, which was making sure we were limiting the number of tools so it wasn't too many. And we really focused on Canvas and Zoom as a way to be consistent and give our teachers a way to communicate and instruct scholars and connect with them. So as Lori mentioned, we had the videos that were being created through public access. And then our summer school teachers started to pilot a consistent structure that we were refining. And then in the fall, we had a real consistent structure for our Canvas courses that allowed students to get right to that Zoom meeting so they could be with an instructor. We were remote, but we were synchronous. And that led into the year where teachers, we provided some professional development through Canvas on how to create these Canvas courses so that they could take that adjusted curriculum for our remote setting and deliver it to students and support students with it in a consistent way that families who were navigating this for the very first time could navigate because it was consistent, and teachers were being consistent about the way they delivered it. And to what everyone else has said, seeing what teachers created just throughout the year, it just blows me away what they're doing every day, creating videos. And we're looking at some of their Canvas courses now to see the structures they built for students to make it easy to access learning and the high quality instruction that is part of our curriculum.
Yeah, Dennis, you really touched on something that really I think about our scholars and their needs, and we're the first, the most diverse district in the state of Washington. We're the 5th most diverse in the country, and our teachers being creative and coming up with ways to ensure equity and access, and that means that we had to have multiple ways that learners could approach the learning experience, whether that be through, like we're saying, the written experience, the video-based experience, to a more, so then a synchronous experience where it's live, to then an asynchronous experience where they then can work through the learning at their own pace and time, and also continue to grow with the class within the synchronous. So I think there were so many elements, and one that really stood out to me that our teachers were embracing were the different strategies they were using to approach the visual medium that was needed for all learners to be able to access. And so
Jan, I think that's a really great point too. And that's some of the things that we've heard as well as some of the important points of this whole thing. And also some of the most difficult to achieve is that equity, that access, and ensuring that your remote students are still engaged. And no matter where they're learning from, and no matter where your teachers are teaching from, is providing and being able to utilize those tools that you're now starting to learn about, and how to further that into this whole new norm is as what they've been calling this. And so, has there been a particular piece of the classroom that the teachers were used to using in the classroom, but then were able to say take it home or utilize at home and sort of take it on to a different level in this current environment?
Yeah, I think so. The others have actually touched on this, and I'm just going to take us back to looking back for just a moment. Is since 2016. The teachers and staff and stakeholders that we've gotten together to really narrow what would it look like for a kindergartner, first grade, all the way up to 12th grader on the types of tools and strategies they experience within the learning, or tools that are available to them to choose from. And so as we've been narrowing those and really isolating and getting feedback along the way from our staff and families, is that we've also done that with hardware. And so we have standard hardware that our teachers have been using in the classroom when we upgraded their workstations a couple of years back. And that actually took us to evaluating the type of laptop we used. Teachers chose that they were going to have touch, which actually really helped with the remote environment and being able to annotate on their screen. And so that was helpful. Another piece that we really worked towards is we had a projector replacement project. And with that, we went towards flat panels. Our flat panels were also interactive touch. So again, another opportunity for teachers to show and demonstrate. And one of the most significant was our shift in and evaluation of our document camera that we were using in schools. There were two different models out there, and it was when you talk about a district with 37 sites, the most diverse, how are you ensuring teachers have access, students have access, and the training they need? So narrowing the tools really helped us. And so with that, we actually did test and evaluate the 3 different types of document cameras, and did choose to adopt the AVER document camera at the time that we were rolling out the new teacher workstation. And that was 1.5 years before COVID. So with that, our teachers did have the opportunity to be trained on the camera itself, as well as how it interfaces with the computer. We chose it specifically because the document camera itself could be a standalone where you use the document camera solely. It does not need to be plugged into a computer. It can work directly through a projector, or it can be used connected to the computer. So having that flexibility in the classroom was really important to us, because when a substitute comes into a classroom, if they don't have the computer right away or know how to use the software, they have to be able to display and have the opportunity to do that with a document camera without being connected to a computer system. Because every school is unique in regards to, we are consistent and systemic, but sometimes someone might not have a laptop at the time that they need it in order to display. So that opportunity, that really solidified for us the ensuring that when we have a document camera, it has to be able to do both. And so, of course, with that, having the ability on the document camera itself to take photos and video, as well as in the software to be able to display, manipulate, and to actually annotate on screen, was actually a huge deal for us. And, you know, Lori and the group have already talked about the summer learning series. When we were training teachers on the different types of video that strategies they could use to videotape so that we could then publish it for the television series for our families and scholars, they actually, many of them chose to use the document camera because it could take the picture, display it on the computer, and they could annotate. They had different options to use it as a webcam. So for us, the opportunity to have a tool that was more universal for us was very helpful.
That's such a great point too. And I think that's one of the things that as we've gone through this process as well, and no one ever expected that all of a sudden teaching and learning would be from home. I mean, no one did. But utilizing a tool that can be used for multiple purposes, and you guys have already gone through a major refresh on these particular types of products, you know, 1 year or 2 before. So the fact that the teachers already knew the products and then they found these other applications, it not just using it as a document camera and not just showing physical objects and documents, but then being able to use that as a video recorder, as a live streaming device, being able to use it as that webcam in that distance learning platform. Because one of the things that we've heard too as well is that it's not only about presenting the content remotely and making sure your students are able to still experience and see that content, but it's also keeping that content with the teacher as well, or that visual representation and that connection to the teacher as well. And whether it's his or her content or his or her face, how he or she moves about her teaching space, you know, really does. And what we've been hearing too is that truly helps to keep their students engaged more, because it gives them a feel like they're still in a live classroom and going that way.
You know, we had a really interesting experience with our student support services colleagues. And I wonder, Kara, can you elaborate on how our special education teachers and the paras on experiences that they were having in remote and the use of the tools?
Well, yeah, a lot of times in some of our classes, you know, we have the paras that do one-to-one support in small groups, and, you know, going to remote, paras were needing to do that remotely, and so trying to figure out the best way to allow them to do that and providing that equipment for them so that they could still interact with those students one-on-one like they had been in the classroom.
I want to build on what Kara was saying too. It was very nice for teachers. Some teachers, the technology, there's a range of comfort with the technology, right? And for the teachers who maybe weren't as comfortable with putting everything into PowerPoint, it was a level of, hey, I know how to do this. So people are really effectively using the tool that they've already used to show student work or to show a book or whatever, that they didn't necessarily have to learn a new thing to be able to connect with students in familiar ways. And the instances where I saw the document camera used, it was used in that way, and just in the way it had been in class, but now they were able to utilize the tool in that way as well, really successfully.
That's great. And those are things as well, again, that we've been hearing. And now that you guys are starting to have students filter back into the classroom, but again, you're going into more of a hybrid format right now. So you still have a lot of learners from home. You have teachers coming back into the classroom with kids in the classroom. So then can you describe how say the document camera again specifically is being used for both ways again, not only to keep engaging the students in the classroom by showing those live visuals and things of that nature, but also with their remote students at home at the same time.
Yeah, it was really interesting you bring this up because, when we talk about how we do professional learning, how we experience work with our teachers who are remote, or maybe we are in person as well. But a lot of times when you have to visually show what's happening in a classroom, whether it's for the learners or whether it's for the teachers doing professional learning, and you're needing to demonstrate hands-on with it, what we've been looking at and actually testing, because we are just now going into in-person learning, we have been looking at the tracking cameras, and we actually been testing those during PD professional learning opportunities. And one specifically because we have had buildings reopen that were new construction that had newer technologies that these teachers have never used before. And so one thing that we leveraged the tracking camera for was the ability for the teachers to be in their room, and in this case, myself and my colleague to be in a different space where the tracking camera could then follow the demonstration that's happening in the room while they're still remote learners, and then also a few inside the room itself. So we're really looking at how can a tracking camera provide an opportunity for our remote learners to be in the class with our in-person scholars. So we're actually in the midst of testing phases of that right now. And so we know that our secondary teachers will be coming back soon. And so we've got a little bit of time to continue to research and to explore that. But that's really where we're looking at right now, is how can we ensure that we don't leave any scholars behind, that whether they're remote, whether they're in person, that they have that experience that then is going to support them best.
So Jay,
And that's another
expand on that a little bit. Do you find that an auto tracking camera engages students possibly more than something that's just a stagnant image?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because during the summer learning series, our teachers were amazing in how they did their video, where they then would stage it where they're in one position, and then they're going to cut that video because then they went to a different position and did something else. They were so creative with their video editing for the summer learning series. But the trick to that is you can't do that in live learning. And so the opportunity, what we're looking at, and the reason why we're looking at a tracking camera, is it affords the opportunity for scholars not to miss a moment of what's happening. So then where the teacher is up in the front of the room demonstrating, but then one of the scholars in the room is going to be answering. If the teacher just moves into proximity of that student, not in an unsafe distance, right? But the camera is still tracking where that teacher is at. Now the other scholar that's near them, hey, scholar two, why don't you answer that? The camera's still picking it up in that same realm, and the kids at home are now able to see what the scholar has to say in person. And then when we shift back, the teacher's been displaying what's happening at home in remote then those scholars can then answer and the rest of the class hears it. That's in person. So I think it affords you both when you're able to display the remote scholars and also show the learning that's happening in the moment and still give the in-person and the remote scholars a chance to talk back and forth, even though they're not together.
And I think that's an amazing point too, as well. And so I kind of wanted to segue that into the auto tracking camera specifically. I know that Federal Way is evaluating, many different kinds of tracking cameras, and there really are many kinds of tracking cameras out there. There are cameras such as ABER's tracking cameras that can track a full or half body. Other tracking cameras can track, voice, or they
use
track
AI where it's a gesture with your hands.
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly. And so there are many different flavors of auto tracking cameras out there and how they're tracked. In your evaluations, have you discovered yet, or have you determined yet, which would be the most appropriate and fluid tracking method in some of the solutions that you've been testing so far?
Yeah, there were 3 on our list, and the top right now in categorizing in regards to the functionality and the clarity of picture definitely has been, there were 2 within the AVER products that were on our top list. We do have 1 other that we are finalizing testing, but of course you have to consider when you think about your product, you also have to think about the ability to the affordability, as well as is it giving you the actual instructional need and approach that that would be worth the purchase. And so right now we're narrowing. We like to track all the different features, do a side-by-side comparison, decide on what is ultimately going to instructionally support us. So there have been, there's a few additional models besides the AVER out there that have been in different reviews and looked at. But right now we're really narrowed it down to 2 different models. And so that is where we're just looking at, first of all, is that going to be our strategy? Because as you know, and all of you out there watching in school districts, when it comes down to strategies that are used, a lot of times there's negotiation in regards to what the final product or process is going to be. And with that, there are many variables. And so we're in the midst of all those variables right now. So hard to say if at this point our final step next, but we do know that we do a thorough research on all our products and ensure that it meets our instructional need.
And that's another great point too. And I'm glad that you brought that up again as well, because again, this type of format and scenario, it's been so confusing for everyone as so many changes, things change almost daily, right now, as far as where we're going to go. I mean, we could be back fully remote tomorrow. So who really knows? And that brings up the other point of future sustainability. So for solutions like this, whether it's a document camera solution or whether it's an auto tracking solution, it's difficult to determine where we're going to be in the next 6 months or the next year or the next 5 years. But what none of us really want is to start shoving in technology that's going to be used for a year and then all of a sudden it's dead or obsolete. So we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But one of the things that might actually come out of this that we've been looking at is the fact that chances are there's always going to be a need from here on out to have a dual purpose sort of curriculum in teaching and learning methods. So whether it's full in class, whether it's full remote, or whether it's going to be a combination of the 2, which more than likely is going to be the way that it's going to be. So do you see a product like an auto tracking camera to be more sustainable, not just for the short-term Band-Aid, but really for the long term as this thing progresses?
Dennis, why don't you go ahead and touch on that?
I think when we talk about a device, it gets back to that functionality, and also I'm thinking of a lot of the students who need that adaptive technology, and the ability for a device to do additional things like for our students who have visual impairments, being able to really zoom in and that ability along with the tracking so that you get great clarity on Again, in the classroom, sometimes there's visual cues that need to be captured, but to be able to get that and have it so that it's still enough to be able to be viewed by students, and get that clarity. Because when you're doing that for those students, all students benefit from that. Again, that ability to have that software, as Jane said, the ability to, when you're not in the room, how do you draw attention that you would draw with a gesture? And you can do that with annotation. And I know a lot of our teachers in the summer videos and in their videos they make for class, something you would do when you're describing a visual that you have under the document camera, being able to annotate it, is this just that pattern interrupt that gets that active engagement from scholars. So I think keeping in mind with any product, the ways that it can benefit all scholars, those scholars that, again, need that high definition visual accuracy to be able to see clearly, which can benefit all students, maintaining that ability to get that active engagement with the software tools, so it's not dependent on a projector or a display. So it can be used with the computer, I think is going to be powerful, because as you said, we're moving towards hybrid and in person, but being able to have those tools that have benefited us in remote and just continuing to enhance those with all scholars in mind, especially our scholars who, again, I keep thinking, and Carrie, maybe you can add to this, those students think about how a device like this might benefit them, who already maybe have a visual impairment where they need to have that high clarity or contrast, is going to be definitely a benefit.
I think when we think about a tool, we have to go back and always shift back, like you were getting at, Grant, in regards to what strategies, instructional pedagogy is going to permeate our scholars' experiences from here on. And it's really in regards to blended and online learning. And when we think about that, we think about the blended learning approaches that are used, whether it's flipped classroom, whether it's station rotation, whether it's students fully online. There's so many different strategies that really narrowing to what is the instructional approach. How can these cameras, like you're saying, then support that approach in the classroom? So if I'm doing a station rotation and I am a teacher who has a group of scholars with me, and then I have a group of scholars in the back of the room who are all working in the back of the rooms, asynchronously, going at their own pace and time. Well, what is the possibility that when I'm with the scholars up front, that I'm recording it at the time that I'm doing it, and it becomes the asynchronous that then other scholars can experience, right? So I think when we think about our pedagogy, like you said, we choose the devices to meet multiple needs, not one device to meet only one. So.
And that's really the point as well. And certainly for companies such as us, we're here to do a job and to do our business. But at the end of the day, this is what our mission is, and it's to support educators and our students and our teachers and our administrators. And for us to be learning things like this on how we can also improve the way that we do things to make sure they consistently fit and are future-proof, quote unquote, is a term that I've used before, to ensure that they're going to continue to be valuable over the long term, so the investment remains solid, and continuously improving and to engage, to keep those students engaged no matter where they are and wherever teachers end up moving. That's really the goal for everyone, I think, as well. And I think that discussions like this between us is not only helpful for us, but again, for so many other districts out there that are still trying to filter their way through the haystack to figure out how to put something like this together to where it's going to be solid over the long term. Now, Jane, just as a little sidebar, I know that you've been testing some other products for some different applications, and you and I had previously discussed actually a very interesting application Dennis previously brought up the idea of visually impaired learners. And you're actually testing one of our newer document cameras right now for a very specific application. Can you kind of go into that for a second?
Yeah, Kara and I, actually, Kara, remember we met there at the ESC, our Educational Service Center, and we had received the M5. So we actually have been testing the M5 camera, and the reason we're testing it, and Kara and I were discussing, there were a couple of different things happening, and I'm going to have her elaborate on it, but really what the focus was, we had a need for para-educators and document cameras, and we were trying to come up with all the different solutions that we could use with them. And the one that we tested was the M5 as a possibility. So Kara, you want to elaborate on our testing and kind of our thoughts in regards to paras and how they would be used after that?
Yeah, so for paras, it's mostly just allow them to do the in-person instruction with kids remotely, but being still able to do things like model and show workbooks and model writing and any of the things and manipulatives and whatever those kids are usually used to using in the classroom, is still being able to let them see those and see how to use those over a remote setting. And also, for our students who are visually impaired, really looking at, the ability to zoom in, and if we can keep the same clarity of the picture as we zoom in, and how easy it is to be able to focus it or move it to what they ever need to look at. So those were just some of the things that we were looking at.
Yeah, so I mean, that's, again, dual purpose. If the paraeducators now needed those cameras in order for remote learning to occur, what can those cameras be used for when we go back into the school site when every classroom already has a document camera? And for the M5, and the reason we were looking at that model and the streamlined look and feel to it was so that then the learners who are visually impaired could then put it into their backpack and take it with them from class to class. And so we evaluated 3 different models, because we evaluated a couple others last spring as well. And the M5 was the one that we've landed on. And because again, it had to plug and play, and it needed to be able to be utilized easily so that the scholars, when they moved room to room, would understand and be able to work through that fluidly.
And are you speaking specifically that the visual learners would, you said the actual learners would be taking them from class to class? So this is small, it can fold up very, very tightly and fit into a backpack. But would you also be using this in an application to where they may even have it on their desk, maybe with their Chromebook, so they can actually take an object or a book or a page and zoom it in on their Chromebook themselves? Is that something else that you've been looking at?
Yeah, we actually use laptops. And so they definitely, and Carrie, you can explain that a little bit more. I know we tested that out, and I know the kids have been doing that with other devices as well. So you want to elaborate on that picture taking?
Yeah, so at their desk, whatever materials they're working on, they may need to zoom in. They may even need to zoom in or be able to see what's going on at the front of the class. And being able to take pictures and then maybe enlarge it on their computer too.
That's such an interesting application as well. And just because, and I know the M5 is our smallest camera, so it's easily portable, but then for the actual student to use it on their own, for their own purpose, to be able to zoom in on any part of the classroom, that's really fascinating. And that's not even something that we had thought of. So I was very grateful to hear that sort of testing and scenario for that, especially that particular camera.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, that's great. What do you guys think about this moving forward? I mean, the confidence seems to be growing that we're going to be back to some kind of a normal. I don't think it's going to be the same normal that we had. But the excitement of things coming back into kids coming back into class finally, but also with this added element of even the flexibility of allowing students to learn remotely, even if they get, say, maybe it's just a regular flu, they have to be home for a week. Maybe they don't have to miss a whole week of instruction. They can still just log on to that classroom whenever they want to. And these are the things, again, that we're looking at ways that we can help future-proof this technology as well to make it truly sustainable over the long term. And I absolutely appreciate everyone's feedback with this as we move forward. So thank you very much again. And if you guys have any other closing thoughts, I would love to hear. And I mean, otherwise, we definitely look forward to continuously working with you and to just keep making this better and easier for everyone.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. Does anybody have anything they want to add? All right. Well, we've got an amazing team here in our Teaching for Learning department, partnering with our technology services and with vendors like yourself, partners and collaborators. Definitely these discussions, and then also even just exploring the possibilities have just been, just amazing and definitely valuable to all of us. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And thank you guys so much. And thank you so much for everything that you do. I mean, I'm a parent myself, and my kids have been going through all of this as well, trying to navigate through this whole thing. And, especially with administrators like you guys and down to the teachers and everyone who's working together to do this, it's just making life a lot simpler for everyone. So thank you very much.